All right, we're back on Top 25 Voter Pod. Alongside me, as always, is John Werner and Chad Conine, Waco Trib beat writers for men's and women's basketball, as well as top 25 voters in the poll. So they've got a unique perspective. Chad, I kind of want to start with the Baylor women coming off a pretty impressive win on Sunday against Iowa State. Iowa State was ranked what, 8th, 7th?
7th.
In
fact, let me, before you finish your question, and that might have been the question in and of itself, is how big of a win is it? But 21 years ago today, and we're recording this on Monday, the 24th, Kim Mulkey won her first game against the top 25 team. It was number 7 Iowa State.
Okay.
So yesterday, Nicki Collen wins her first game against the top 25 team, number 7 Iowa State.
That's a nice little symmetry there.
Yeah. Well, I wrote about that in Texas Sports, my book, Texas Sports. It has something on every day of the year. So a little plug for that book.
I have a copy right over here. I could probably.
Yeah, I got one down. It's under my desk here.
So you did allude to the question. Obviously, that was a much needed, not just top 25 win, but a top 10 win for Nicki Collen's team. How much does that do for them as she kind of tries to stamp her mark on this program?
Well, I think it's absolutely essential because, you talk about blood in the water with games like at Kansas State and at Oklahoma, that people think Baylor is weakened because Kim's not over there on the sideline, and they get into the game with them and they decide that they can beat them and they really come after them. And they have that sort of springboarding their momentum in a game. And you could see it in the Oklahoma game. Baylor got out to a lead. And then when Oklahoma started to make its move, it was like, it was on Fox Bally Sports Southwest, and so I couldn't actually see it. But you just from the play-by-play, you got the feeling that Oklahoma sensed that they could come get Baylor, and that's what they did. So then Baylor gets its legs back under it, wins at Kansas. By the way, barely. That was a crazy game. And then beats up on Oklahoma State the other night. And Iowa State comes in ranked number 7. And I was talking to our friend Jerry Hill before the game. I was like, it's weird to be in here and feel like Baylor is the underdog in a game. But it didn't feel that way for very long because Baylor got out to a lead in the first quarter. Even though Iowa State hit a couple of threes to tie it going into the second quarter, Baylor reasserted itself right at the beginning of the second quarter. And then, they just made shots. Honestly, it's like, any basketball team that plays any style, if you start making shots and get in a roll, especially at home, especially a big game at home, you're going to be tough to beat. And that's what happened with Baylor yesterday. And the most important thing for them, like as a program and as like their self-identity in the program, is that they now know that they're a team that's capable of doing that to a really good team.
Yeah, it's funny how that works in basketball. If you make baskets, you tend to look like a little bit better team. Even a guy like Ben Simmons, of the Philadelphia 76ers, he's got that broken jump shot. When it's going in, man, who cares? Which for him, it's not going in that often. But I digress. John,
yeah, you can't help talking a little NBA, can you?
No, I can't. John, the Baylor men bounced back with two big road wins last week after a couple of home losses. How impressive was that turnaround, do you feel like, especially considering they're still without Jeremy Sochan, and poor James Akinjo has a bruised buttocks.
Yes, he does have a buttocks injury.
Yes.
I got dropped on a skate when I was in the first grade and bruised my tailbone. That was maybe the worst injury I've ever had.
Yeah, well, you don't want your butt kicked. I mean, let's just put it like that.
Yeah, Bryce. Yeah, just they did what they had to do. They got off to big leads against both West Virginia and Oklahoma, and then kind of weathered the storm. Both those teams came back, and both those games they finished strong. And I tell you, a guy who's playing really well is LJ Cryer. He's he didn't play a whole lot last year. He's behind four great guards, and he's one of the best 3-point shooters in the country. He's shooting almost 50% from 3-point range. He played well. It seemed like Adam Flagler got used to handling the ball a little more. I thought he played well those 2 games. And it was just a great, collective win. And I think Scott Drew did some great coaching in both those games. The first time they played Oklahoma, Oklahoma made a lot of good cuts to the basket. We're using screens, just had a lot of layups. This time they didn't. And they were packing it inside on defense. They were maybe giving them the outside shot a little more, but it really worked, the strategy, because Oklahoma, they just couldn't hit those shots consistently. And Baylor forced 25 turnovers, which is a whole bunch. So those are just 2 very impressive wins.
I'm going to take a little bit of a detour here. We'll circle back to the Bears, but Auburn jumps up to number 1 in the poll. Read where it was the first time ever for Auburn. Even the Charles Barkley, led Auburn team never made number 1. They had Chuck Person, but obviously this is a pretty good Auburn team. That said, it's I don't know how many different teams now, John, have been ranked number 1. Baylor, Auburn, Gonzaga. Was Kentucky up there?
No, I believe it's been 6.
6, okay.
Teams. Yeah.
Which leads me to my question, which is this, and Chad, you certainly can weigh in. Do you feel like there's a great team out there?
Wow. That's a really good question. There's so much parity in college basketball, men's, especially men's. I just don't think you see just fantastic teams like you used to, like the 76 Hoosiers. And plus, you don't see as many veterans, guys in a program 3 or 4 years. You see veterans, but they've usually transferred now. The transfer portal's gone nuts. So, just having that kind of chemistry. Baylor had it last year. They were pretty unique in this day and age. You have a lot of veterans on that team. But, with the lack of, teams just building like they used to, I don't think there is just a great team out there.
I think that, I think basketball fans are hype machines, I think people get hyped about one team in college basketball. And I think people overhype prospects a lot midway through the season. A player will get really hyped just because he's a great dunker. And then he goes way higher than he should in the NBA draft. And the thing with the hype, the reason I mentioned it this year, you come into the season and Gonzaga is super hyped, and then they lose 2 games in 8 days and everybody falls out of love with them, but I think Gonzaga might be, that great team out there. And I'm sure Gonzaga people don't like this, but what a dream it would be to play 5 or 6 really good games in November and December, and then just get to line up people you can pound for 3 months, or
Right.
2.5 months.
Yeah.
How much fun?
I'm not sure it worked necessarily to their advantage last year. They looked like they had a historically great team.
Mhm.
It was setting up that way, and then Baylor just dismantled them in the national championship game. I feel like Gonzaga really might benefit from being in a little bit stronger conference. It'd be interesting to see
Sure.
Gonzaga maybe in the Pac-12.
Well, Texas Tech and Kansas play tonight. Kansas is ranked number 5, so they could be in that pool of teams you might talk about as one of the great teams in the country. Well, when they came to Lubbock, Tech had their best two players sitting on the bench and beat them by 8 and handled them, you know? So I'm not saying Texas Tech belongs in that conversation, but Kansas doesn't look otherworldly to me. Now I'll probably get bit in the butt by they'll look great tonight, you know?
Well, from a fan's perspective, it's not always a bad thing not having this sort of dominant team out there. I would say, especially this year in the NFL, we don't necessarily have just the greatest team out there, and yet look at the weekend that it produced.
Oh.
I mean,
Well, that was fun.
unbelievable.
And just like, it was great all weekend, and then it finished just unbelievable.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
It did. Staying on men's basketball, and then we're going to circle back to the women here for a second. So, John, along with that parity that you mentioned, you have a Big 12 that's pretty solid, top to bottom. I mean,
Yeah.
So Joe Lunardi, the bracketologist, I guess, has 8 teams making the NCAA tournament from the Big 12 right now. What's your number? How many do you feel like get there?
I think eventually it's going to be 7, just because in conference you beat up each other so much. Some teams going to end up with a bunch of conference losses. But, you know, he had TCU, one of the last 4 in, and they played really well. They probably deserve it right now. But yeah, it's, you know, for a 10-team conference, you know, with 7 or 8 teams, or even 9 if K-State got hot, to make a bid for the NCAA tournament, that's remarkable. I mean, you're looking at conferences like the ACC and Big Ten, or maybe hoping to get in 6 or 7 teams, but that's not even half the league. So you're looking at probably 70% of the Big 12, most likely
considering
getting
Oklahoma
in,
State's not
8.
eligible. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. And Oklahoma State's not eligible. So it's 8 of 9 that are eligible.
Yeah. And like you said, with an outside shot at 9. So
here's my assessment of the Big 12 right now. You've got you've got 4 really good teams. And then you've got 6 teams that if you don't play your best, they can beat you. And so that produces what we see is unpredictability every night of the week. You know, I mean, Kansas State's a good enough team to win 9 games in conference and get in the tournament.
Yeah.
They've created an uphill battle for themselves. I think 2-4 now, or 2-5 now. But I mean, they're good enough.
And not to belabor a point that we've talked about a lot, but I feel like nothing breeds predictability more than continuity. And if you have a team that you can like get together and stick together for a while, that team, you know, tends to go out on the floor knowing what it can do, knowing what it has to do to win. And because you just have so much roster turnover, I think that certainly breeds the unpredictability.
Well, I think that's something that the Texas Tech has benefiting from. People talk about all the transfers and people that they brought in, but you had 4 guys that were loyal to the program and stayed there, that have been there for multiple years. At least 3 of them have been there for 2 years previous to this year. And TJ Shannon, Kevin McCullough, Clarence Nadolny, and Marcus Santos Silva. And those 4 guys were loyal to the school and loyal to the program, and they stayed there. And those guys would kind of become the core of the team in a way. And then you add those other guys around them, you know, and I mean, Baylor has 4 or 5 guys that have been there, you know, that were on the team last year. And I think that's what makes them as good as they are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you have a great core and you make some good additions. Yeah, that's a
even
that's the best
if you're
picture
just
for it.
on the team and your role is different, you're a backup maybe, and then you ascend to a starting position or some sort of different role. I still think there's benefits to that. Flipping the question I asked John around to the women's side, Chad, how many Big 12 teams make the NCAA tournament on the women's side?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough question. You've got actually, it is a bit of an unusual week, I believe, because I think you've got more women's teams ranked from the Big 12 than men's teams, right? There's four men's teams ranked.
Right.
And then the women have Kansas State, Oklahoma, Iowa State, Baylor, and Texas. So they got 5 women's teams ranked and 4 men's teams ranked, which is, and I think those 5 women's teams that are ranked are probably your 5 that really have a shot. Kansas is getting a vote, or Kansas got 1 vote from somebody somewhere for the top 25. But, you know, the other 5 look solid. Kansas State, I voted, I think I mentioned last week, I voted them 16 a couple of weeks ago and just got a lot of love from Kansas State fans. And then they fell out of the poll last week, even though I still had them at like 18 or 19. And I got them back up to 17 this week. But they've got, gosh, one of the most dominant players in the country and good role players around her. They showed up against Baylor, how good those role players could be. But Bryce, you were talking about a little while ago, Ayoka Lee scoring 61 points.
Unbelievable.
On Sunday.
Yeah. In a crazy sports weekend, obviously the NFL is going to dominate the conversation always, but her performance gets a little overlooked. But 61, it's an NCAA record. And John, you were mentioning earlier, it makes you wonder, what's the most you've covered? Chad, what's that answer for you? Can you remember the highest scoring output you've ever covered?
Well, I mean, you're going to roll your eyes. It's a Red Raider, of course. I saw Rayford Young go off against Kansas back in, I think, 1990, or in 2000. He scored, I want to say he scored 48 against Kansas. And of course, Cheryl Swoops, I can't remember what the numbers were on that one, but Cheryl Swoops had, like around a 50-point game.
Johnny?
Yeah, mine was Jackie Stiles, late 90s against Baylor, 54. And she capped it with
yes, mention that.
Yes, and she capped it with a 4-point play.
Yeah,
Hit
to win the game, right?
Yes, and a free throw.
Yeah, that I remember. I was at the Trib at the time, and you guys know I like to play a little pickup ball. After that game by Jackie Stiles, that performance, we were playing pickup ball like the next day or something, and all the guys out there were going, Jackie Stiles, every time they shoot,
I was out there, Bryce.
Yeah, good
that
stuff.
Was fun.
Yeah, I had to think about this a little bit, but Brittany Griner scored 50 on senior day, including at least one dunk. And that one, I think might be the answer to the question. I think I've seen, I might have seen 51 on the high school level too.
Okay.
I want to say Haley Abbey went for 51, the former Robinson girl, but
wow.
I may be blowing smoke there. I don't know. The old mind gets bad after a while, right, John?
Well, it doesn't take. I mean,
right.
That Rayford Young game that I thought was 48 was actually 32.
Oh my God.
That's a little off, Chad.
It was way up. But the Cheryl Swoops game against Texas at Reading Arena, she scored 53.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, we'll be back. We'll be back.
Wait, before we finish though.
Okay.
I just have to say this to get it out there, right? I voted NC State #1 this week.
Yeah.
I'm the only person that doesn't have South Carolina at #1. But here's the reason why. I didn't have South Carolina at #1 last week. I had Louisville at #1. Well, NC State beat Louisville. South Carolina didn't play, so I flipped NC State to number 1. Because they did something deserving of the number 1 ranking, right? And I also have Kansas State, like I said, 17, where I think they're actually at number 25, which I have them a lot higher than most people. But that's because of Ayoka Lee and what I've been able to see. And sometimes in the poll, John, you know this, you're kind of hampered by who you've seen. And Texas moved up 4 spots this week on the strength of beating Iowa State, but they beat Iowa State without Ashley Jones. Now, I know that might be the case all up and down the poll, but I know those things, so I have to vote on what I know in those cases, right?
Right.
I applaud you for your foresight on K-State. However, my applause is muted by the fact that this whole podcast, you've had a very wonky internet connection, and it's been very Max Headroom like. And and then if you look at John Werner over here, if you want to talk about Max Headroom, good gosh, John, get your video straight. So we're going to be back next week to provide more high quality video content here at the Trib.
Well, we just need to have a Wi-Fi check before we start.
As well as misinformation, 32 points and 48 points. Good gosh.
It seemed like more.
It felt like more. Okay. Yeah, that's the way the mind works. Thanks, guys. And we'll see all of y'all next week.
All
Sounds
right.
good.